quickly. So we've entered a very typical, as I'm sure most or all of you are aware, a very typical old-growth valley bottom stand, and so a lot of what a lot of our history is trying to understand how forests of different ages, the dynamics over time, how they respond to disturbance, and then also how we can learn from that to do logging and forest management that takes advantage of some of those dynamics and those ecosystem processes to kind of balance our timber needs and our resource needs. So from the beginning, we've really been set up to look at, we talk about them as disturbances, and you can think of what we do intentionally as a disturbance or as management. It depends on your perspective, whether you're a red tree voles or a person. But our program has been set up relevant to like what we're all discussing here with post-fire and the collaborative futures, to be the place where we have all this information prior to disturbances, and then we can follow disturbances over long periods of time and learn things that we couldn't if we just were bouncing around from one site to another. We've done a lot of work going after fires and looking at fire recovery, but most of those situations you don't know exactly what the situation was before the fire. And so this is a place you can see, Lookout Creek here, the main stem. You can see this gravel bar just got a little bit rearranged just last weekend or weekend before last by the big flows that we had. A little bit further down here, we're not going to be able to get there, but you can see alders that have recovered, a gravel bar that was deposited in the 96 flood, and the alders that have come up from there. We were studying trout and salamander populations through that whole period of floods, and so we were able to see, how floods impacted salamanders in areas that had intact log jams and didn't have intact log jams, and how that affected the response of some of the species that we particularly care about in the streams. And we spent a long time over our 76-year history reconstructing the disturbance history of forest, and largely fire and insect outbreaks and wind throw. And so we've reconstructed what we can about fire history, and we spent decades and decades studying it, but it took until 2020 for the Holiday Farm to get right up above across the creek here. It got that far, and then 2023, 70% of the enders burned in Lookout Fire, which was, as all of you experienced, was somewhat traumatizing. We've evacuated 3 times in the last 5 years, but we are built for, we have veg plots all over this landscape. We have all this information that is just there waiting to follow this fire story and fire recovery story, and we're building more experiments with regeneration and post-fire, and so I think it's a really interesting time from the research program perspective that we have. This is kind of, we were ready to catch the 64 and particularly the 96 flood and the stream story, and we were ready to catch this fire story. So putting a positive spin on it, this is a process that's been in this landscape for thousands of years. Humans, we've been part of that process, and so is lightning, and it's going to be a process going forward. And so, we're kind of poised to naturally, as part of the long-term ecological research program and experimental forest program, to study that. But I think we're really interested in hearing your perspectives on things that we might not be thinking about in terms of fire.
One of my big questions before today was, have you had the capacity, since the number of fires, to take advantage of the unparalleled opportunity to set up grid of comparison plots across some of the forests under different ownerships and different ages? The land that used to be Roseboro, and I don't know who owns it now, and some of these other managed stands of different ages and so forth, and to compare, you wouldn't have as much pre-data, I know.
Right.
Compare recovery effects across, I mean, you can have a grid of the different fires, the forest types, the severity of the work, and so forth.
So
Can
yeah,
y'all
so
hear back there?
so have we had the opportunity after the fires to not just study the plots that we already have on the Andrews, but look across this whole landscape and across ownerships and across management histories and burn histories,
Yeah.
and follow that out. And I would say the core funding that we've had here is really we haven't, you know, it barely even stretches to kind of cover this, but there are researchers who are a core part of our program that are doing work in the landscape. There's Kevin Bladen has students. Cozy Busby has students that are looking at regeneration and how the fungal communities associated with the foliage and in the soil, how that relates to success of regeneration. And so they're working in areas, I don't think they fully cover the whole gradient, but certainly there's a lot of work going on Weyerhaeuser land, there's work going on various private properties in the Holiday Farm footprint in particular. So, and that's another way that our program has worked, as Kari mentioned, with education and research. You know, we have some kind of core projects, and we can't, or we don't really want to just walk away from veg plots we've been studying since, you know, the 1900s or 1970s. And so that particular source of funding only goes that far, but people do use this as a way to leverage other grants and pay for work that's out there. And I think there is a lot of interest in expanding that, but it is sort of grant dependent, I think, is kind of it.
You said that 70% of the expand is burned during the lookout.
I think technically it's 68, but yeah, if you round up.
So what is the footprint, the acreage footprint of?
Yeah, we're about 16,000 acres. So yeah, basically the Holiday Farm got our, probably Cliff was involved, our small watersheds where we did our first logging experiments were across the creek here and downstream from here. The Holiday Farm burned 2.5 of those watersheds. Then there's a gap, Lookout Fire, there's a gap of about a mile, and Lookout Fire got all the way to about within a mile on this side. It did not get anything on this north slope that we can see here, but basically got everything except that. There's like a strip. Most of the 30% is here, and then there's a little gap here, and a little bit right along Lookout Creek where it was moist enough and the fire crews were able to catch it. Yeah.
So just thinking out loud here, because you said 3 out of the 5 years you've been evacuated up there. And this last year, the students, Kelly Shaw, the counselor at McKenzie School, reached out to us. You know, the students were pretty traumatized once again with all this smoke, and what can we do to help in that process? So we put together, you know, go beds and had them build their own go beds and feel this sense of empowerment. Thinking out loud here, how do we get these students up here so you guys can educate them about fire? You know, and that's just something I'm thinking about, because you guys are studying that and have been studying it. So they feel this sense of empowerment and this sense of knowledge. So how could we?
Yeah,
How could we do
I
something
mean, we
like that?
certainly. So actually, part of this environmental leadership program collaboration, one of the modules they're doing this year is on fire with middle school students, and we're hoping that McKenzie School will come out for that. We'll be able to schedule that. Yeah, I think it would be great. I mean, I think so. One of the challenges, and this is where, you know, potentially volunteers who are better at talking to middle schoolers than I am. Like, one of the challenges I have is you put me in front of middle schoolers, and they're it's not going to work out. So like, it needs to be someone who's
Gotta
gifted.
entertain 'em, man.
Yeah.
I used to tell my middle schoolers, you're half human, half the time, you know, and then you go from there. But they're fun to work with once you get on.
Yeah, but
I'm with you, Eric.
the second part of this is it takes funding
Right.
to do this. So as we're talking and thinking about it, what type of funding would be needed to do that project and help educate those kids? Because then we can help look for those funds so we can
Yeah,
make
I mean, I
this
think
happen?
in general with education programs, we often need, with Mackenzie, I think it's less of an issue because they have their own, you have your own school bus, right? Nate often drives up the bus, but often it's funding for substitutes, funding for transportation, and then, you know, funding for someone beyond, say, me or Kari to actually speak in a language that is attractive to middle schoolers. But yeah, so it's not a huge, it would not be
You
much.
can't do that.
Oh, no, you can't, you can't. Yeah, but,
You just have to wear the Andrew. You got the sound like Newt right there.
I just
the
think
new-
starting
but yeah,
to
it's not
educate
it's not high dollar.
No.
It's and we do have a little bit of in our OSU Foundation. We do have a little bit of education funding that's kind of perpetual. It's not very much, but yeah, I mean, we could certainly talk about how to make that happen for sure.
Just from a researcher standpoint, could you just briefly, for some of the folks that aren't really familiar with HJ,
Yes.
describe the uniqueness of this large lab here that we have with Lookout, because it is a unique, geologically speaking, all that, on how this can be a lab that it is.